The city of Lagos buzzed with life as the golden sun cast its warm glow over the streets, filling them with the hustle and bustle of a new day. Among the early risers was Victoria Johnson, a 24-year-old school teacher with a heart full of dreams and a mind sharpened by education. Raised by a single mother, Margaret Johnson, a self-made businesswoman, Victoria had learned the value of hard work and perseverance from an early age. Her mother owned a successful chain of high-end boutiques, but Victoria had chosen a different path, preferring the simplicity of molding young minds rather than living a life of luxury. Teaching at Golden Crest Academy, a well-respected private school, gave her purpose, though her salary barely covered her expenses. Despite her financial struggles, Victoria never once regretted her decision. She was a woman of principle, and she believed in building a life based on love and character rather than wealth. It was on one fateful evening, as she waited at a roadside bus stop after a long day at work, that she met Derrick Williams, a charming and ambitious man who, at the time, seemed like everything she had ever wanted. He was a struggling salesman at Royal Auto Dealership, making just enough to survive but with a dream of one day owning his own car business. They struck up a conversation that night, bonding over shared frustrations about life and dreams of a better future. For Victoria, Derrick's resilience was admirable, and for Derrick, Victoria's kindness and intelligence were unlike anything he had ever encountered. They exchanged numbers, and from that moment an unbreakable connection was formed. Days turned into weeks, and their relationship blossomed like a flower in the rainy season. Derrick was not a rich man, but what he lacked in wealth, he made up for in effort and affection. He would surprise Victoria with handwritten letters tucked into her work bag, late-night phone calls that lasted until dawn, and impromptu visits to her school just to see her smile. Victoria's colleagues often teased her about dating a man who couldn't afford the luxuries she deserved, but Victoria didn't care. She believed in love over material possessions, a belief her mother strongly disagreed with. Margaret, a woman who had built an empire from scratch, had seen too many men ruin hard-working women's lives, and she warned Victoria not to settle for a man with no stability. "Love is not enough, my dear," Margaret had told her one evening as they sat in the grand living room of their luxurious home in Banana Island, Lagos State. "A man who cannot provide today will turn his love into resentment tomorrow." But Victoria, blinded by love, dismissed her mother's concerns. Derrick was different, she believed. He was hard-working, determined, and he made her happy. Against her mother's wishes, she continued dating him, even as the whispers around her grew louder. Friends and family tried to caution her, but Victoria had already made up her mind. When Derrick finally proposed to her in the most humble yet heartfelt way, down on one knee in the very spot where they first met, Victoria didn't hesitate to say yes. Their wedding was a modest but beautiful ceremony, attended by close friends and family. Victoria, in a stunning white lace gown, looked like a princess despite the simplicity of the event. Derrick, beaming with pride, vowed to love and protect her for the rest of his life. For a while, it seemed like a fairy tale. They moved into a small two-bedroom apartment in the mainland, struggling but happy. Victoria continued teaching while Derrick worked tirelessly at the dealership, dreaming of a promotion that would one day change their lives. Their love was strong, passionate, and full of laughter, and soon, it bore fruit, a beautiful baby girl they named Gabriella. The moment Victoria held her daughter in her arms, she felt a love deeper than anything she had ever known. Derrick was an attentive father, doting on his daughter and showering Victoria with affection. But as the months passed, the reality of financial strain began to creep into their perfect world. The responsibilities of fatherhood weighed heavily on Derrick, and though Victoria assured him they would get through it together, he felt an increasing pressure to succeed. When an opportunity for a high-paying job at Empire Motors, one of the most prestigious car dealerships in Lagos, finally came knocking, Derrick saw it as the breakthrough he had been waiting for. Little did Victoria know, the man she fell in love with would soon become a stranger right before her eyes. The first year of marriage was filled with love, laughter, and shared dreams, but as time passed, reality began to set in. The honeymoon phase faded, and the weight of responsibilities grew heavier on Victoria and Derrick. While Victoria worked tirelessly at Golden Crest Academy, balancing her career with motherhood, Derrick became increasingly frustrated with their financial struggles. He loved his wife and daughter, but deep down, he resented his inability to give them the luxurious life they deserved. He tried to hide it, but Victoria could see the change in him. The man who once left her little notes of love had started coming home later than usual, his smile fading, his words growing shorter. "I just need to work harder," he would say when Victoria asked what was wrong. But his exhaustion was more than just physical, it was emotional. The burden of financial pressure was pushing him to the edge. Victoria, despite her own exhaustion, remained patient. She understood that marriage wasn't just about the good times but also about enduring hardships together. She reassured Derrick that they would overcome this phase, reminding him that love was their strongest foundation. But Derrick didn't see love as a solution anymore, he saw money as the only answer. And as much as he tried to fight it, the cracks in their marriage had begun to form. The once romantic nights turned into silent dinners, and the warmth between them started to fade. To make matters worse, Margaret Johnson, Victoria's mother, never stopped warning her. "This man is not ready for the kind of life you deserve, Victoria," she would say whenever they spoke. "I see it in his eyes. A man who resents his struggles will soon resent his wife." But Victoria, still believing in Derrick, refused to listen. She defended him at every turn, arguing that love required patience and sacrifice. But Margaret was not convinced. She had built her empire from the ground up and had seen too many women suffer for believing in men who were not ready to lead. She watched her daughter struggle in silence, raising Gabriella with all the love in the world while trying to keep her marriage intact. But love alone could not fix what was breaking. The once dedicated father and husband began prioritizing work over family, barely spending time with Gabriella. On weekends, when Victoria looked forward to family outings, Derrick would claim he had extra shifts at the dealership. But the truth was, he was avoiding home. He felt like a failure, and rather than face it, he buried himself in work. He no longer saw Victoria as his partner but as a painful reminder of the life he wanted to escape. And Victoria, though hurt, tried to understand. She clung to the hope that one day, things would return to the way they once were. Then came the first real betrayal, one that Victoria could never have predicted. One evening, after putting Gabriella to bed, Victoria prepared Derrick's favorite meal, hoping for a night of rekindled love. But Derrick never came home. His phone was switched off, and the night stretched into morning with no sign of him. When he finally returned the next day, he smelled of perfume that wasn't hers. Victoria confronted him, but Derrick dismissed her suspicions, saying he had spent the night at a colleague's house discussing business strategies. Victoria wanted to believe him, but her heart told her otherwise. The distance between them grew wider. The man she once trusted with her entire being was slowly slipping away. And she could feel it, the beginning of something she feared the most. Derrick was changing, and not for the better. Victoria could feel the shift in her marriage like a storm brewing in the distance, silent at first but threatening to destroy everything in its path. Derrick had become a stranger to her, no longer the loving husband who once whispered promises of forever into her ears. He came home later and later, his phone always locked, his excuses growing more elaborate. "Work was hectic," he would say when Victoria questioned him, or, "I had to attend a business meeting." But the perfume on his shirt, the lipstick stains on his collar, and the sudden increase in his spending habits told a different story. Victoria tried to ignore the signs, desperately holding on to the illusion that their love was strong enough to survive. She told herself that it was just a phase, that all marriages went through difficult moments. But deep down, she knew better. The man she once knew was slipping away, and no matter how tightly she held on, she was losing him. Margaret saw it too. During one of their conversations, she sighed and said, "Victoria, love should not feel like this. If a man makes you question your worth, then he is no longer worthy of you." But Victoria was not ready to give up. She still had hope, even when hope was the very thing breaking her heart. Then came the moment that shattered every remaining illusion. Victoria was at the grocery store when she saw Derrick in the distance. He wasn't alone. He was standing beside a woman dressed in an expensive red gown, her manicured fingers resting comfortably on his arm. The woman laughed as Derrick leaned in to whisper something in her ear. Victoria's heart pounded violently in her chest, disbelief washing over her like ice water. She felt frozen in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. Every doubt she had tried to silence, every worry she had convinced herself was just in her head, had now been confirmed in front of her eyes. Derrick was cheating. He was not at a business meeting. He was not working late. He was with another woman, parading her in public as if Victoria didn't exist. Victoria clenched the shopping cart, trying to steady herself, fighting the urge to walk over and demand an explanation. But what would she say? What excuse would he give this time? She turned and left, feeling an ache so deep in her chest that she thought it might crush her. That night, she confronted Derrick, but instead of guilt, he showed annoyance. "Why are you always acting like a detective?" he snapped. "Why can't you just trust me?" But Victoria had trusted him. She had trusted him with her heart, her life, and her future, and he had thrown it all away. But the ultimate betrayal was yet to come. Gabriella's birthday was fast approaching, Valentine's Day, the day their daughter had been born, the day that once held so much love for them. Victoria had spent weeks planning the perfect birthday party. Gabriella was excited, hoping that this year her father would finally be there to celebrate with her. She had even drawn a special card for him, writing in her innocent handwriting, "Daddy, I love you. Please come to my birthday party." But Derrick had different plans. On the morning of Gabriella's birthday, he left without a word. Victoria called and texted, but he never answered. He had abandoned their daughter on her special day to spend Valentine's with his mistress. Gabriella waited by the door all evening, clutching the card in her tiny hands, her hopeful eyes searching for a father who would never come. When the party ended, and Derrick was still nowhere to be found, Gabriella finally spoke in a broken voice, "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy love me anymore?" Victoria's heart shattered into a million pieces. That was the moment she knew, the man she had married was gone. And no matter how much she had loved him, she could not force him to be the husband and father he no longer wanted to be. Derrick's luck changed when he landed a high-paying job at one of the most prestigious car dealerships in the city, Regal Motors. It was an opportunity he had been waiting for, a chance to elevate his status, to live the life he always dreamed of. The offer had come unexpectedly, through an old acquaintance, Raymond, who had always admired Derrick's ability to talk his way into anything. "You've got charm, my friend," Raymond had said. "People trust you. You could sell sand in the desert." The job came with a significant salary, commissions on every car sold, and the chance to mingle with the elite. Derrick saw it as his ticket out of mediocrity. At first, he was excited to share the news with Victoria. He imagined how happy she would be, how this new job could provide a better life for their daughter. But something shifted the moment he stepped into that high-end world, the world of expensive suits, sleek luxury cars, and powerful men who never had to explain their whereabouts to anyone. It wasn't long before Derrick started adopting the mentality of those around him. His priorities changed. He no longer wanted the simple life he once shared with Victoria. He wanted more. And in his mind, Victoria, with her modest teacher's salary and her predictable routines, no longer fit into the picture. At first, the money came in like a flood. Derrick became a star at Regal Motors, closing deals with some of the wealthiest clients in the city. He was good at what he did, too good. He had a way of making people feel like they needed a car, even when they had no plans to buy one. The commissions rolled in, and with them came a newfound arrogance. He started staying out later, drinking in high-end bars with his colleagues, indulging in the thrill of being around influential men. And then there was Priscilla. She was a wealthy businesswoman, a frequent customer at Regal Motors, and the definition of everything Derrick now craved: sophisticated, powerful, and unattainable to most men. She had a different kind of beauty, the type that came with confidence and a sense of entitlement. She didn't chase. She was the one being chased. And Derrick, intoxicated by his new lifestyle, fell for the illusion that being with her meant he had finally made it. It started with innocent conversations at the showroom, then expensive lunches, then private weekend getaways under the guise of business trips. He told himself it wasn't cheating, just networking. But deep down, he knew what he was doing. He was building a new life, one that did not include Victoria or Gabriella. The change in Derrick was undeniable. Victoria felt it before she saw the proof. He stopped calling to check on them, stopped coming home early, stopped noticing her at all. She watched as the man she loved became someone else, someone crueler, more detached, more impatient. When she asked why he was always late, he accused her of nagging. When she expressed concern over his spending habits, he told her she was too simple-minded to understand how things worked in the real world. The worst part was Gabriella. The little girl who once had her father's full attention now barely got a glance from him. When she asked him to read her bedtime stories, he was always too tired. When she showed him her drawings, he barely looked before mumbling, "That's nice." Derrick was too absorbed in his new lifestyle to notice the growing sadness in his daughter's eyes. But Victoria noticed. She saw everything. And with each passing day, she realized she was losing the man she once thought would love her forever. At first, Victoria tried to ignore the signs. She told herself Derrick was just adjusting to his new job, that the late nights, expensive purchases, and the cold way he treated her were just temporary. But deep inside, she knew something had shifted. The warmth in his eyes was gone. The laughter they once shared over dinner had been replaced by tense silence. He was always on his phone, always texting someone, always stepping outside to take calls. When she asked who he was talking to, he would get defensive, telling her she was being paranoid. Paranoia. That's what men called it when women started noticing the truth. And Victoria was noticing everything. She saw the way he suddenly cared about his appearance, how he bought expensive colognes and tailored suits that weren't necessary for his job. She saw how he started carrying himself like a man who wanted to be admired, not by his wife, but by someone else. And then there was the lipstick stain. A smudge of deep red on the collar of his white shirt, a shade Victoria never wore. She held the shirt in her hands, staring at it, feeling her world tilt. But when she confronted him, he laughed. "Victoria, you're embarrassing yourself. It's probably from one of my clients. Do you think I'd be that careless?" She wanted to believe him. But doubt had already sunk its claws deep into her heart. Gabriella, their sweet, innocent daughter, was beginning to feel the change too. She had always been a daddy's girl, always running into Derrick's arms whenever he walked through the door. But now, she barely got a glance from him. "Daddy, look. I drew a picture of our family," she exclaimed one evening, holding up her crayon drawing with a bright smile. But Derrick, barely looking up from his phone, muttered, "That's nice," before walking away. Gabriella's smile faltered. She turned to Victoria, her small voice laced with confusion. "Did I do something wrong, Mommy? Daddy doesn't play with me anymore." Victoria felt her heart shatter. She scooped her daughter into her arms and whispered, "No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong." But she couldn't tell her the truth, that the man who once adored them had changed. That he was slowly slipping away into a world that didn't include them. And as if the emotional neglect wasn't enough, Derrick had also stopped contributing financially. He was making more money than ever, yet the bills started piling up. The electricity bill went unpaid. Gabriella's school fees were overdue. When Victoria asked him about it, he waved her off, saying, "I have expenses, Victoria. You're a teacher. You can handle it." The final blow came when Victoria decided to surprise Derrick at his workplace. She had baked him a cake, something she used to do when they were still happy. Maybe if she showed him love, he would remember what they had. Maybe he would change. But when she arrived at Regal Motors, she saw him before he saw her. He was standing with Priscilla, his so-called client, laughing in a way he hadn't laughed with Victoria in months. Priscilla touched his arm, whispered something in his ear, and Derrick smirked. Victoria felt sick. Gathering her courage, she walked up to him, holding the cake in her trembling hands. "Derrick," she said, her voice softer than she intended. But instead of smiling, instead of being happy to see her, Derrick did something she never expected. He looked at Priscilla, then at Victoria, and with a cold chuckle, he said, "This is my house help. She must have followed me here." Victoria stood frozen, humiliated beyond words. Priscilla laughed, shaking her head. "She's adorable," she said mockingly. Victoria wanted to scream. She wanted to smash the cake into his face, to demand why he was treating her like a stranger. But she did nothing. She just stood there, realizing that the man she loved was truly gone. Victoria walked away from Regal Motors that day, clutching the untouched cake in her trembling hands. Tears blurred her vision, but she held them back. The man she had loved, sacrificed for, and built a life with had reduced her to nothing more than a mere house help in front of his mistress. The humiliation burned deep, but what hurt the most was that Derrick didn't even flinch when he said it. He didn't try to correct himself, didn't run after her, didn't even care that she had heard him. That night, Victoria sat in their dimly lit living room, watching Gabriella color in her books, oblivious to the storm raging inside her mother. She had spent years ignoring the red flags, making excuses for Derrick's behavior, hoping he would change. But now, she realized something: he wasn't going to change. If anything, he was getting worse. She felt trapped, but more than that, she felt lost. Where had the love gone? The man who used to hold her at night, who whispered sweet promises into her ears, was now a stranger. When he finally came home at midnight, reeking of expensive cologne and alcohol, she mustered the courage to confront him. "Why, Derrick?" Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "Why did you humiliate me like that today?" He scoffed, throwing his keys onto the table. "Oh, Victoria, don't be dramatic. You shouldn't have come to my workplace uninvited." Her heart clenched. Uninvited? Wasn't she his wife? When had she become an outsider in her own marriage? Gabriella had woken up in the middle of the night to the sound of raised voices. She tiptoed toward the staircase, her small hands gripping the banister as she listened to her parents argue. "You don't even care anymore, Derrick. You don't care about me. You don't care about our daughter. What happened to us?" Victoria's voice cracked, and for the first time in years, she let her tears flow freely. Derrick rolled his eyes. "Us?" he scoffed, pouring himself a drink. "There is no us, Victoria. I'm tired of pretending. I've outgrown you. I have needs, and you," he gestured toward her, his lips curling in disgust. "You're just a boring school teacher. Look at yourself. You're nothing like the women I associate with now." The words hit Victoria like a slap. She was nothing? The woman who had stood by him when he was struggling? Who had loved him when he had nothing? Gabriella, too young to understand the depth of their conversation but old enough to feel the pain in her mother's voice, clutched her teddy bear tighter. The next morning, Victoria packed a small bag and took Gabriella to visit her mother, Margaret. She needed clarity, guidance, but most of all, she needed love, something she wasn't getting in that house anymore. Margaret, despite her illness, noticed immediately that her daughter was breaking. She held Victoria close, whispering, "You deserve better, my child. You always have." Victoria broke down, sobbing into her mother's shoulder. But deep down, she wasn't sure if she had the strength to leave. Days passed, and Derrick's behavior only worsened. He started disappearing for entire weekends, refusing to answer Victoria's calls. She found receipts for luxury hotels, diamond bracelets, and lingerie, things she never received. Each discovery was like a knife to her heart. And then, the final straw came. It was Gabriella's birthday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. Victoria had planned a small party, decorating the house with balloons, baking Gabriella's favorite vanilla cake, and inviting a few of her school friends. Gabriella was excited, wearing her best pink dress, her eyes shining with hope. "Mommy, Daddy is coming, right?" Victoria hesitated, then forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart." She had reminded Derrick a week ago, even texted him that morning. But as the hours passed, it became clear, he wasn't coming. Gabriella's smile faded. The other kids laughed and played, but she sat by the window, waiting. By 8 p.m., the party ended, and the guests left. Gabriella, still clutching a slice of untouched cake, whispered, "He doesn't love me, does he, Mommy?" Victoria felt something inside her break. That night, she made a decision. She wasn't going to fight for a man who no longer fought for her. Derrick had made his choice, and soon, she would make hers. Victoria woke up the next morning with a new sense of resolve, but the heaviness in her chest hadn't disappeared. The image of Gabriella waiting by the window, clutching that slice of cake, haunted her. It was a moment she would never forget, a moment that shattered every last piece of hope she had been holding onto. She had spent years making excuses for Derrick, but there was no excuse for this. He had broken their daughter's heart, and Victoria couldn't forgive him for that. She spent the morning cleaning up the remnants of the failed birthday party, each discarded balloon a reminder of the disappointment Derrick had caused. Around noon, her phone vibrated, and she saw his name flashing across the screen. For the first time, she didn't feel the usual mix of anger, hurt, and longing. Instead, there was only exhaustion. Taking a deep breath, she answered. "Victoria." Derrick's voice was laced with fake concern. "I know I missed the party, but something came up at work." Victoria closed her eyes, gripping the phone tightly. Work? Another lie. She had seen the pictures on social media. He had been at a rooftop restaurant with the same woman she had seen at his office, the woman he had humiliated her in front of. "Something came up?" she repeated, her voice deceptively calm. "Derrick, Gabriella waited for you all day. She cried herself to sleep last night." He sighed impatiently. "Victoria, don't start. You know how demanding my job is. I can't be everywhere at once." Something inside her snapped. "No, Derrick," she said coldly. "You just can't be where you're supposed to be." Derrick arrived home later that night, expecting the usual silent treatment or, at worst, a tearful argument. What he didn't expect was Victoria standing at the door, holding his packed suitcase. "What is this?" he asked, frowning. Victoria met his gaze, her face unreadable. "It's your last chance, Derrick. You've made it clear where your priorities lie, and I won't let you keep hurting me or our daughter." Derrick scoffed, stepping past her into the house. "Oh, please, Victoria. What are you going to do? Kick me out? We both know you don't have the guts." But Victoria wasn't backing down this time. "I'm done begging for your attention. If you walk through that door again after tonight, it's because you're choosing your family. But if you leave, don't come back." For a moment, Derrick hesitated. He had never seen her this serious before. There was something different in her eyes, something final. But instead of reflecting on his actions, he let his arrogance take over. "You're being dramatic," he said, grabbing his car keys. "We'll talk when you've calmed down." He walked out without a second glance, slamming the door behind him. Victoria exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her chest. He had made his choice. Now, she had to make hers. For the next few days, Victoria focused all her energy on herself and Gabriella. She went back to work, threw herself into lesson plans, and spent more time with her mother. But no matter how hard she tried, the pain lingered. Margaret noticed the change in her daughter and gently placed a hand over Victoria's one evening. "You don't have to pretend to be strong all the time, my love," she said softly. "It's okay to break." Victoria swallowed the lump in her throat. "I just don't know what to do, Mom. If I leave him, what happens to Gabriella? I don't want her to grow up without her father." Margaret's expression turned sad. "Victoria, growing up with a father who doesn't love or respect her mother is worse than growing up without him at all." The truth of those words hit Victoria like a punch to the gut. She had spent so long clinging to a broken marriage for Gabriella's sake, but was she really doing her any favors? That night, as she lay in bed, she knew that Valentine's Day had marked more than just another disappointment. It had marked the beginning of the end. And soon, there would be no turning back. Valentine's Day arrived, but instead of the excitement and anticipation Victoria had once felt in their early years together, there was only a dull ache in her chest. She had long stopped expecting romantic gestures from Derrick, but for the sake of their daughter, she still clung to a thread of hope. Maybe he would surprise them. Maybe he would remember that love wasn't just about extravagant gifts but about being present. But as the day stretched on and the hours passed, reality hit her like a cold wave. Derrick hadn't called, hadn't sent a message, hadn't even acknowledged the day. Gabriella, still innocent to the growing distance between her parents, had made a small Valentine's card for him, carefully decorating it with tiny hearts and a stick figure drawing of their family. "Do you think Daddy will like it?" she asked, her eyes shining with excitement. Victoria forced a smile, swallowing the lump in her throat. "He'll love it, baby." But deep inside, she knew the truth. Derrick wouldn't even bother to look at it. As the evening approached, Margaret called, sensing the heaviness in her daughter's voice. "Come over," she urged. "You and Gabriella don't have to spend tonight alone." Reluctantly, Victoria agreed, packing a small bag for them both. Just as they were about to leave, her phone buzzed. It was a picture message, from an unknown number. With shaky fingers, she opened it, and what she saw made her blood run cold. The image on her screen was undeniable. Derrick was sitting in an upscale restaurant, laughing, his hand entwined with another woman's. The same woman from before, the one Victoria had seen outside his office, the one he had humiliated her in front of. But this time, they weren't just talking. In the next picture, Derrick leaned in and kissed her. Victoria felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her. So this was why he hadn't come home. This was why he hadn't called. He had spent Valentine's Day whining and dining another woman while Victoria sat at home, waiting like a fool. The betrayal burned through her, hot and consuming. She could handle his neglect, his coldness, but this was a knife straight to the heart. "Mommy?" Gabriella tugged on her sleeve. "Are we still going to Grandma's?" Victoria quickly locked her phone and forced a steady breath. "Yes, baby. Let's go." But as she drove, her hands trembled against the wheel, her vision blurred with unshed tears. At her mother's house, Margaret immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked softly. Victoria didn't answer at first. She just handed her the phone. Margaret's face darkened as she took in the images. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't have to. The truth was staring them both in the face. That night, long after Gabriella had fallen asleep, Victoria sat by the window, staring into the darkness. How had it come to this? How had she become the woman who begged for love that was never given? She thought of the sacrifices she had made, the years she had wasted trying to hold together something that had been broken for far too long. But this was different. This wasn't just another missed dinner or another empty excuse. This was Derrick showing, with undeniable proof, that he didn't care. That he had moved on while she was still here, clutching at the pieces. A deep, burning rage filled her chest. She had spent too long being silent. Too long accepting the bare minimum. But no more. She wouldn't let Derrick humiliate her any further. She picked up her phone, staring at the pictures one last time before pressing delete. She didn't need them. The betrayal was already seared into her soul. Tomorrow, she would make a decision. And this time, there would be no turning back. Victoria woke up the next morning feeling different, like something inside her had finally snapped. The pain was still there, raw and consuming, but beneath it, there was something stronger. Determination. Clarity. And understanding that she could no longer stay in this cycle of neglect and humiliation. As she prepared Gabriella for school, she plastered on a smile, but deep inside, her mind was racing. What was she still holding on to? A husband who had stopped loving her? A marriage that had turned into a prison? She had been fighting for something that no longer existed, and last night's pictures had been the final push she needed. She needed to get out. Not just for herself, but for her daughter. Gabriella deserved a mother who was happy, a mother who knew her worth, and Victoria was finally ready to become that woman. Dropping Gabriella off at school, she lingered in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Today, she was going to confront Derrick. No more excuses. No more waiting for him to change. It was time to take control of her life. With that thought solidified in her mind, she started the car and drove straight to his office. The moment Victoria walked into Derrick's office building, heads turned. She wasn't the timid wife anymore. She wasn't going to cower in humiliation. When she reached the receptionist, she met the woman's gaze head-on. "I need to see my husband. Now." The receptionist hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but before she could respond, Derrick's voice rang out behind Victoria. "What the hell are you doing here?" Victoria turned slowly, meeting his eyes without flinching. There was no warmth in them, no guilt. Just irritation. He was dressed immaculately, his tie perfectly knotted, his arrogance still intact. Victoria held up her phone and, without a word, showed him the pictures. His face paled for a fraction of a second before he scoffed. "So what? You came all the way here to cry about this?" Victoria felt something inside her harden. That was all he had to say? No remorse. No regret. Just pure indifference. "No," she said calmly, slipping her phone back into her bag. "I came here to tell you that I'm done. I won't be your fool anymore." Derrick smirked. "Victoria, don't be dramatic. You're not going anywhere." His arrogance was suffocating. He thought she would never leave. He had gotten too used to her silence, her patience. But he had underestimated her. "Watch me," she whispered. And with that, she turned on her heel and walked out. That night, Victoria started packing. She wasn't going to stay in that house a second longer. Every item she folded, every suitcase she filled, was a symbol of her reclaiming her life. As she packed Gabriella's things, tears burned her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She wasn't crying for Derrick anymore. She was crying for the years she had wasted, for the love she had given freely to a man who had never valued it. Margaret arrived just as she zipped up the last suitcase. "Are you ready?" her mother asked gently. Victoria took one last look around the bedroom she had once shared with Derrick, the walls that had witnessed her pain, her loneliness, her broken dreams. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. She grabbed her bags, took Gabriella's hand, and walked out the door. She wasn't just leaving a house. She was leaving behind a version of herself that no longer existed. She was done waiting for Derrick to choose her. She was choosing herself. Victoria sat in the lawyer's office, her hands trembling slightly as she signed the last document. This was it. The final nail in the coffin of a marriage that had long been dead. She never imagined that after years of sacrifice, she would be sitting in a cold office, signing away the vows she had once cherished. But here she was, and surprisingly, she felt no regret. Just an eerie calm. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with sharp glasses, gave her a reassuring nod. "That's the last one," "Mrs. Daniels," he said, then corrected himself. "Miss Anderson." The name felt foreign on her tongue, yet liberating. She wasn't Derrick's wife anymore. She was Victoria Anderson again, her own person, free from the chains of a toxic love. Just as she was about to stand, the door swung open, and Derrick strode in, his expression unreadable. "You're really doing this?" His voice lacked emotion, but Victoria saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Was it doubt? Fear? She didn't care. "I already did," she said simply, pushing the signed papers toward the lawyer. Derrick scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're overreacting, Victoria. This is ridiculous. We don't have to do this." But Victoria met his gaze, unwavering. "You did this," she said firmly. "The moment you stopped treating me like your wife, our marriage was already over." Derrick's jaw tightened, his pride not allowing him to admit defeat. He had expected her to break down, to beg him to reconsider, but Victoria wasn't the same woman he had walked all over for years. He ran a hand through his neatly styled hair, frustration clear on his face. "So that's it? You think you'll find better out there? You think life is easy without me?" Victoria let out a soft laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Life without you can only be better," she said, standing up. Derrick stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Victoria, don't be foolish. You have no job, no money. Where will you go? How will you survive?" His words were meant to scare her, to make her second-guess herself, but they only fueled her determination. For years, she had relied on Derrick, allowing him to dictate her worth. Not anymore. "That's none of your concern," she said, turning toward the door. "We're done, Derrick. This is the last time we will ever have this conversation." Derrick grabbed her arm, his grip tightening for a second before he released her. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the first sign that maybe, just maybe, he was realizing what he had lost. But it was too late. Victoria walked out without looking back, feeling lighter than she had in years. The news of their divorce spread like wildfire. Friends, family, and even strangers whispered about how the once envied couple had crumbled. Victoria expected pity, but instead, she found support. Margaret welcomed her home with open arms, and even Gabriella, though too young to fully understand, seemed happier away from the tension. For the first time in forever, Victoria had peace. She started working on rebuilding her life, taking online courses, exploring career opportunities, and spending quality time with her daughter. There were still moments of doubt, nights when the silence was too loud, but she reminded herself that she had made the right choice. Meanwhile, Derrick tried to pretend like nothing had changed. He buried himself in work, spent nights out drinking with friends, and paraded his mistress around town. But no matter how hard he tried to mask it, there was an emptiness inside him. An emptiness he hadn't felt before. Victoria was gone, and for the first time, Derrick started to wonder if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Victoria woke up to the unfamiliar feeling of solitude. No longer did she have to wake up to Derrick's cold indifference or his rushed morning routines that left her feeling invisible. She lay in bed for a moment, absorbing the silence, realizing that it wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. Gabriella was still asleep in the next room, her soft breathing a reminder of the one thing that mattered most. Victoria stretched and got out of bed, stepping into her new reality, one she was determined to shape on her own terms. The first few days had been difficult, filled with lingering memories of a past she wished she could erase. She would catch herself expecting Derrick to walk through the door or hear his voice echoing through the halls. But as days turned to weeks, the house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a home. She spent her time applying for jobs, attending online business courses, and, most importantly, reconnecting with herself. There was something liberating about being in control of her own destiny, even if the road ahead was uncertain. She had been dependent on Derrick for so long that she had forgotten her own strength. Now, she was learning to stand on her own. Derrick, on the other hand, drowned himself in distractions. He had convinced himself that the divorce was just a phase, that Victoria would soon realize she couldn't live without him and come crawling back. But as weeks passed and she didn't call, his confidence wavered. He would see her social media posts, pictures of her smiling, out with Gabriella, or celebrating small victories like getting a freelance project. The more he saw her thriving, the more bitter he became. He buried himself in work, but even his job didn't feel as fulfilling anymore. His colleagues noticed his irritability, his lack of focus. Even his mistress, Vanessa, who had once been the thrill of his life, was now just another reminder of what he had lost. Their once passionate affair had dulled, reduced to meaningless encounters that left him feeling empty. Derrick would catch himself comparing Vanessa to Victoria, how Victoria's laughter had been genuine, how she had once believed in him when no one else did. But pride was a cruel master, and Derrick refused to admit his mistake. Instead, he convinced himself that Victoria was just trying to prove a point, that she would eventually fail and come back. He just had to wait. But Victoria had no intention of looking back. With Margaret's help, she secured a small job managing an online boutique, something she could do from home while caring for Gabriella. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She was also learning about investments, watching videos late into the night, determined to build something for herself. Meanwhile, Margaret encouraged her to step out more, to socialize, to live. "You've spent too many years living for Derrick," she told her one evening. "It's time to live for yourself." So Victoria did. She started attending networking events, meeting new people, slowly rebuilding the confidence Derrick had stripped away. And the more she grew, the more she realized just how much of herself she had lost in that marriage. She had been a shadow of who she once was, but now she was finally stepping into the light. Derrick had expected her to break, to beg for his support. Instead, she was rising, and for the first time, he was the one left in the dark. Victoria had once believed that life after Derrick would be unbearable, that the weight of being a single mother, unemployed and uncertain of the future, would crush her. But what she hadn't anticipated was how freeing it felt to finally breathe without his presence suffocating her. Each day, she grew stronger, stepping out of the shell she had been confined to for years. With Gabriella's laughter echoing through the house, Victoria found comfort in the small moments, a quiet morning coffee, a peaceful evening walk, the joy of making her daughter's favorite pancakes on Sundays without the looming fear of Derrick's disapproval. For the first time, she was living, not just surviving. With Margaret's guidance, she immersed herself in business studies, soaking up knowledge on investments and financial independence. She no longer wanted to rely on anyone. She was determined to build something of her own. At first, it was overwhelming, the numbers, the strategies, the risks, but Victoria was nothing if not resilient. She channeled all her pain and betrayal into ambition, refusing to let her past define her future. And slowly, her small steps turned into strides. She landed a few freelance clients, started earning, and even found herself smiling at the possibilities ahead. Meanwhile, Derrick's world wasn't as blissful as he had imagined post-divorce. His fantasy of a perfect life with Vanessa had quickly turned into a nightmare. What had once been thrilling, the sneaking around, the excitement of an affair, had lost its allure now that Vanessa was no longer forbidden. She had demanded more attention, more gifts, more of his time, things Derrick had never considered when he left Victoria. Worse still, his work performance had started to decline. His superiors had noticed his lack of focus, and whispers of possible layoffs had begun circulating. Derrick had convinced himself that Victoria's life would crumble without him, but to his surprise, she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Every now and then, he would see updates from mutual friends about how Victoria was excelling in business, how she was becoming more independent, more successful. And with every post, Derrick felt a deep pit of regret settle in his chest. He had never thought she could make it without him, and now that she was, He was forced to face an ugly truth: he had underestimated her. But Victoria wasn't looking back. Her past with Derrick had been a painful chapter, but it was just that, a chapter. She was ready for new beginnings. With the growing success of her online boutique management and the business knowledge she was gaining, she set her sights on bigger things. She began attending women's business conferences, meeting successful entrepreneurs who inspired her to dream beyond survival. One of them, a powerful investor named Mrs. Lawson, saw potential in Victoria and encouraged her to start her own business. "You have the mind of an entrepreneur, my dear," she had said one evening at a networking event. "Don't waste it working for others." And for the first time, Victoria believed it. The fear of failure was still there, lingering at the edges of her thoughts, but the fear of remaining stagnant was greater. She was ready to take a risk, to build something of her own. She had been the woman behind Derrick's success, sacrificing her own dreams for his. Now, it was her time. And she was going to take it. Derrick had always been a man who prided himself on control over his career, his finances, and most importantly, his relationships. But lately, that control was slipping through his fingers like sand. At work, things were going from bad to worse. His boss had grown increasingly frustrated with his lack of focus and commitment, and the whispers of layoffs had turned into official warnings. His once bright future at the company now hung by a thread. But what frustrated him the most was the realization that Victoria, the woman he had abandoned without a second thought, was doing just fine without him. He had imagined her crawling back, begging for him to return, but instead, she was rising, glowing in ways she never had when she was with him. And it burned him. Meanwhile, life with Vanessa had become unbearable. What he had thought was love was nothing more than infatuation, and now, without the thrill of secrecy, their relationship felt empty. Vanessa was demanding, impatient, and utterly uninterested in his struggles. She wanted a man who could provide, and as Derrick's financial situation worsened, her affection dwindled. It didn't take long before she stopped pretending. She had gotten what she wanted from him, and now she was done. One evening, after another exhausting day at work, he returned home to find her packing her designer bags. "You're broke, Derrick," she had said bluntly, not even looking up as she zipped her suitcase. "And I don't do broke." And just like that, she walked out, leaving him in the very same loneliness he had once condemned Victoria to. Victoria, on the other hand, was too busy to even think about Derrick's misery. She was stepping into a new world, one that had once seemed impossible for a woman like her, a world of wealth, power, and success. With the guidance of Mrs. Lawson and other influential mentors she had met, she was preparing to launch her own fashion and business consulting firm. She had always been skilled at organization and business management, and now she was turning those skills into profit. The first time she walked into a boardroom filled with men in suits, she had felt the familiar wave of self-doubt creeping in. Was she really meant for this? But then she remembered everything she had been through, everything she had survived, and she squared her shoulders. She belonged here. And the more she spoke, the more confident she became. Investors listened, they respected her ideas, and before she knew it, she had secured funding for her first major business venture. It was surreal. The woman who had once been reduced to a helpless housewife, tossed aside like she was nothing, was now building an empire of her own. And the best part? She had done it without Derrick. Meanwhile, Derrick's situation spiraled further out of control. After Vanessa left, he found himself drowning in debt. The apartment they had lived in was far beyond what he could afford alone, and soon, the eviction notice arrived. His once loyal friends began to distance themselves, uninterested in associating with a man who no longer had influence or money. But the final blow came at work. His boss called him into the office one afternoon, a grim look on his face. "Derrick, we've given you enough chances," he said, sliding an official termination letter across the desk. "You're fired." The words echoed in Derrick's ears like a death sentence. He had lost everything: his marriage, his mistress, his job, his home. He had walked away from Victoria, believing that he was upgrading his life. But now, she was the one winning, and he was left with nothing. Regret was a slow poison, eating at him day by day. And for the first time, Derrick was forced to face the truth: he had made the worst mistake of his life. Victoria's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. She had gone from being a woman who had once sacrificed her dreams for a marriage that ended in betrayal to someone who now commanded attention in every room she entered. With the guidance of Mrs. Lawson and the support of key investors, her business empire was taking shape. She had launched a fashion and business consulting firm that specialized in empowering women entrepreneurs, providing them with resources and mentorship to build their brands. Her name began to circulate in the elite business world, and invitations to exclusive networking events flooded in. Every morning, Victoria woke up with purpose, her heart filled with a determination she had never known before. The pain Derrick had caused her was no longer a wound, it was fuel. While she had once dreaded looking at the woman in the mirror, now, she admired her own reflection. The confidence in her eyes, the strength in her stance, it was a version of herself she had never thought possible. Yet, despite her success, she remained humble. She didn't flaunt her achievements to seek revenge on Derrick. She simply focused on being the best version of herself. And that, in itself, was the sweetest revenge. Meanwhile, Derrick was sinking deeper into despair. His once promising career had come to an end, and with no savings to fall back on, he was forced to downgrade his lifestyle drastically. He moved into a cramped, run-down apartment in a neighborhood that he once would have never set foot in. The reality of his downfall hit him hard every time he opened his near-empty fridge or struggled to pay his bills. The same friends who had once surrounded him during his moments of success were nowhere to be found. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored. He had never truly understood loneliness until now. But what hurt the most was seeing Victoria's success plastered all over social media and the news. He saw pictures of her attending high-profile business summits, standing beside influential figures, smiling radiantly in a way she never had when she was with him. The realization stung: he had underestimated her. He had believed she would crumble without him, but instead, she had flourished. The weight of his mistakes pressed down on him, suffocating him with regret. If only he could turn back time, if only he had treated her differently. But now, she was out of his reach, and for the first time, he truly felt the emptiness of losing a good woman. As Victoria's influence grew, so did her financial power. She was no longer just a rising businesswoman. She was becoming a force to be reckoned with. Then came the news that would change everything: her late mother's will had finally been processed. Victoria was called to a prestigious law firm, where she sat in a large, intimidating office, waiting for the final verdict on her inheritance. She had known her mother was wealthy, but nothing could have prepared her for what came next. The lawyer, a well-dressed middle-aged man, handed her a thick document and looked at her with a knowing smile. "Congratulations, Miss Victoria," he said. "You are now the sole heiress of your mother's billion-dollar empire." Victoria's breath hitched. Billion-dollar empire? She had expected a substantial sum, but this was life-changing. Tears welled up in her eyes, not because of the wealth, but because she wished her mother had lived to see this day. She had always believed in Victoria's potential, and now, her legacy was in her daughter's hands. At that moment, Victoria vowed to honor her mother's memory, not just by being successful, but by using her newfound wealth to uplift others. Little did she know, her inheritance would soon shake the very foundation of Derrick's existence. Victoria sat in the grand conference room of Lawson and Associates, a prestigious law firm known for handling the estates of the wealthiest families in the country. The air was thick with anticipation as she stared at the polished mahogany table, her fingers trembling slightly. Seated across from her was Mr. Graham, the firm's senior attorney, who held a thick folder containing the final details of her late mother's will. "As per the last testament of Mrs. Margaret Lawson," he began, Flipping through the legal documents, her entire estate, businesses, and financial assets have been transferred to her only daughter, Victoria Lawson. The words echoed in Victoria's mind like a distant dream. For years, she had believed her mother's wealth was comfortable but never imagined it to be at such an overwhelming scale. The numbers in the report were staggering: properties in the most expensive locations, investments in thriving industries, and bank accounts holding unimaginable sums. She was no longer just a successful entrepreneur, she was now one of the richest women in the country. Yet, beyond the fortune, there was a deeper realization. Her mother had always seen her potential, ensuring she would never have to depend on a man to define her worth. The press wasted no time in broadcasting the news, and, soon, Victoria's face was everywhere, on television, in magazines, and on social media. "Young businesswoman becomes billion-dollar heiress" was the headline that dominated financial news. Overnight, invitations to elite business clubs, partnership offers, and even old acquaintances who had once ignored her were suddenly eager to reconnect. But Victoria remained focused. With her inheritance, she made swift decisions, restructuring her mother's companies, appointing the best minds to manage operations, and launching a new foundation in her mother's honor to support young female entrepreneurs. As she signed each legal document transferring full control of the empire to her name, she felt a newfound sense of purpose. No longer was she the abandoned woman who had been discarded by a selfish husband. She was now a woman of influence, a force that could not be ignored. She knew, however, that not everyone would celebrate her rise. Some would envy her, some would doubt her abilities, and one man in particular, Derrick, would soon come to realize just how much he had lost. Meanwhile, Derrick sat in a dingy apartment, scrolling through news articles that announced Victoria's inheritance. His hands clenched into fists as he read the numbers: billions. The same woman he had dismissed, humiliated, and left for another had now surpassed even his wildest dreams. His chest tightened with regret. He had once seen her as a simple woman, one who would never amount to much, and now she was commanding respect from business moguls. The realization of his mistake gnawed at his soul. He had chosen greed, chasing after temporary pleasures, believing that Victoria was not enough. But now, he was the one struggling, while she had risen like a phoenix from the ashes. As he stared at her picture on the news, poised, powerful, and glowing with success, a single thought crossed his mind. He needed to find a way back into her life, but deep down, a part of him knew it might already be too late. Derrick paced his tiny apartment, his mind racing with frustration and disbelief. Victoria, the woman he had once belittled and abandoned, was now one of the wealthiest women in the country. The news of her billion-dollar inheritance played repeatedly on every media outlet, mocking his downfall. His once promising job had slipped through his fingers, his expensive lifestyle was gone, and the mistress he had chosen over his wife had long since abandoned him. He had always believed that he was destined for greatness, but now he was just another man struggling to survive. The regret weighed heavily on him. He had laughed at Victoria when she had cried for their marriage, thinking she was nothing without him. Now, the tables had turned. She had the power, the influence, and most importantly, the freedom to live without him. Derrick knew he had to act fast. He couldn't sit back and watch her rise while he drowned in his own misery. He had to find a way back into her life, no matter what it took. Desperation fueled his actions as he reached for his phone, searching for any connection that could get him close to Victoria. He called old friends, tried to contact her former colleagues, but every attempt was met with silence or rejection. It was as if she had erased him from her life completely. The realization made his stomach churn. For the first time, he was experiencing what Victoria had felt when he had discarded her like she was nothing. But Derrick wasn't ready to accept defeat. If he couldn't reach her through normal means, he would have to force his way into her world. He started tracking her public events, looking for any opportunity to confront her. He even considered showing up at her office, but security would never let him in. Days turned into weeks, and his desperation turned into an obsession. He needed Victoria to see him, to hear him out, to understand that he had changed. Or at least, that's what he told himself. But Victoria wasn't the same woman who had once loved him. She was stronger, smarter, and completely uninterested in the past. Her schedule was packed with business meetings, charity events, and high-profile interviews. She had no time for distractions, especially not from a man who had thrown her away. When Derrick finally saw her in person at a charity gala, he felt a mixture of awe and intimidation. She looked breathtaking, confident, radiant, untouchable. As he stepped forward, ready to speak, Victoria's bodyguards immediately blocked his path. "Mr. Derrick, you are not welcome here," one of them stated firmly. Victoria didn't even glance in his direction, as if he were nothing more than a ghost from a forgotten past. Humiliation burned in his chest. He had lost her, and for the first time, he realized, getting her back wouldn't be as easy as he thought. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Derrick sat in the darkness of his apartment, his hands buried in his hair as frustration clawed at his chest. Victoria had become untouchable, and every attempt to reach her had ended in failure. His once unshakable pride had crumbled, leaving behind nothing but a desperate man with no direction. He replayed the last time he had seen her, the way she had walked past him at the gala without even acknowledging his presence. It was as if he had never existed in her life, as if the years they had spent together had meant nothing. His heart burned with regret, but more than that, it burned with a sense of loss. He had lost Victoria, but more than that, he had lost the life he had foolishly thrown away. Now, he was just a shadow of the man he used to be. But he refused to accept that this was how his story would end. If she wouldn't listen to him, if she wouldn't see him, then he would have to make her. With renewed determination, Derrick made one final plan. Victoria's assistant, a young woman named Esther, had once been friendly toward him when he and Victoria were still together. He remembered how she used to admire him, how she had always greeted him warmly whenever he visited Victoria at work. If there was anyone who could get him close to Victoria, it was her. He spent days tracking Esther down, eventually finding her during her lunch break at a small cafe. "Esther, please," he begged, his voice raw with desperation. "I just need 5 minutes with Victoria. I need to tell her how sorry I am." The young woman's expression hardened as she stirred her tea. "Mr. Derrick, Victoria has moved on." "She doesn't need your apologies," she replied coldly. But Derrick wasn't ready to give up. He dropped his pride, pleaded, even offered to pay for a chance to see Victoria. After what felt like an eternity, Esther sighed. "I can't promise anything," she said. "But I'll see what I can do." For the first time in months, Derrick felt a flicker of hope. 2 days later, Esther texted him an address. Victoria would be visiting one of her charity foundations that evening. Derrick dressed in his best clothes, rehearsing his words over and over. This was his last chance. As he arrived at the foundation, his pulse raced. He saw her from a distance, surrounded by children, her smile bright and genuine. She looked so different from the woman he had once known, happier, freer. His heart clenched. Had she truly erased him from her life completely? Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. But before he could even reach her, security intercepted him. "Sir, you are not allowed here." Derrick's chest tightened as Victoria finally turned to look at him. For a brief moment, their eyes met. There was no anger, no hatred, just indifference. And that was the moment Derrick realized the truth. She had moved on. And he had lost her forever. Derrick stood outside Victoria's estate, the cold night air biting into his skin as he clutched the gate with trembling hands. He had tried everything, calls, messages, even attempting to meet her at events, but she had shut every door in his face. Now, stripped of his ego, his arrogance, and his pride, he was left with nothing but the truth. He needed Victoria, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get her back. The security guards at the gate recognized him instantly. "Sir, you are not allowed here," one of them said firmly. But Derrick, for the first time in his life, was beyond shame. "Please, just let me see her. I have to talk to her," he pleaded. The guards exchanged glances before one of them radioed inside. Minutes later, Esther appeared, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Derrick, you should leave," she said coldly. But Derrick dropped to his knees, right there on the pavement. "Please, Esther. Just let me speak to her. Just once," he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. Esther hesitated before sighing and disappearing back inside. After what felt like an eternity, the gates finally opened, and Victoria stepped out, her eyes locking onto Derrick's broken form. He had never seen her look so powerful, so untouchable. The woman standing before him was not the Victoria he had abandoned. This was a woman who had risen from heartbreak, built an empire, and learned to live without him. "Derrick," she said, her tone neutral, as if speaking to a stranger. His heart clenched painfully. "Victoria, please," he whispered, struggling to stand. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't live without you. I was a fool. I lost everything, and Victoria held up a hand, silencing him. "You didn't lose everything, Derrick. You threw it away," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Derrick swallowed hard. "I was blinded by greed. By ambition. But now I know, you were the best thing that ever happened to me," he admitted, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. Victoria studied him for a moment before shaking her head. "It's too late." Derrick's heart shattered at her words. "Victoria, please, just give me a chance. I'll do anything to make it right," he begged. But Victoria remained unmoved. "You only want me now because I have money, Derrick. But where were you when I had nothing? When I needed you the most?" Derrick opened his mouth, but no words came. There was nothing he could say, nothing that could erase what he had done. "You made your choice," Victoria continued. "Now, live with it." With that, she turned around and walked back inside, leaving Derrick kneeling on the cold pavement, broken and alone. The gates shut behind her, the finality of it crashing down on him like a death sentence. And for the first time in his life, Derrick understood the true meaning of regret. Victoria stepped inside her mansion, the sound of the gate locking behind her sealing the chapter of Derrick's return forever. She didn't look back, not even once. She had spent years crying, doubting herself, and hoping that one day he would see her worth, but tonight proved something she had always known deep down: she didn't need his validation anymore. As she walked into the grand living room, Esther and her closest business associate, Donald, were waiting for her. "Are you okay?" Esther asked gently. Victoria took a deep breath, a slow smile creeping onto her lips. "I'm free," she whispered. Donald, who had been one of her strongest supporters since she inherited her late mother's company, stepped forward with admiration in his eyes. "You deserve happiness, Victoria, and you deserve someone who values you, not just for your wealth but for the incredible woman you are." Victoria glanced at him, something unspoken passing between them. Donald had always been there, reliable, understanding, and kind. She had been so busy healing that she never considered opening her heart again. But tonight, as she thought about her future, she realized something else: she was finally ready. The following weeks were filled with endless business meetings, expansion plans, and new investments. Victoria poured herself into her work, transforming her mother's company into an even bigger empire. Under her leadership, the business soared to new heights, breaking records and becoming one of the most influential corporations in the country. Everywhere she went, people admired her strength. Women who had been betrayed, abandoned, and underestimated saw her as a symbol of resilience. She had not only survived, but she had thrived. Derrick, on the other hand, faded into obscurity. He had tried to rebuild his life, but nothing worked. His business partners refused to work with him, His so-called friends abandoned him, and even Tasha, the woman he had chosen over Victoria, was nowhere to be found. Karma had completed its circle, leaving him with nothing but regret. He had tried to contact Victoria again, but this time, she had blocked him completely. His chapter in her life was officially closed. One evening, Victoria found herself standing on the balcony of her penthouse, overlooking the glittering city skyline. Donald joined her, holding 2 glasses of wine. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. Victoria smiled and clinked her glass against his. "To finally choosing myself," she replied. Donald watched her for a moment before speaking. "You know, Victoria, I've always admired you, not just as a businesswoman, but as a person. You're strong, brilliant, and," he paused, then sighed. "And I've fallen for you." Victoria's heart skipped a beat. For the first time in a long time, she felt something stir inside her, not fear, not pain, but hope. She set her glass down and turned to him, her eyes searching his. Then, she smiled. "Maybe it's time I let myself love again." And with that, she took his hand, stepping into the future without looking back. The morning sun poured through the grand windows of Victoria's penthouse, illuminating the luxurious space with golden light. She stood on her balcony, breathing in the crisp air, feeling lighter than she had in years. The past was behind her, and for the first time in a long time, her heart was at peace. Donald had stayed the night, but not in the way Derrick would have assumed. There was no rush between them, no desperate attempt to fill the void left by betrayal. Instead, there was something far more profound: respect, understanding, and a slow, blossoming love that Victoria had never experienced before. As she sipped her coffee, she heard his footsteps behind her. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm. She turned to face him, her smile coming effortlessly. "Good morning, Donald." He reached out, brushing a stray curl from her face. "I was thinking, maybe we could take the day off. Just you and me. No meetings, no calls, no stress. What do you say?" Victoria chuckled. "You know I don't take days off." But as she looked into his eyes, she realized, maybe it was time to start. Months passed, and Victoria's life became a testament to the power of resilience and reinvention. Her mother's company had flourished under her leadership, and now, she was expanding into new territories, making a name for herself beyond what anyone had imagined. Women from all over the country sought her advice, inspired by how she had turned her pain into power. She had become more than just a billionaire heiress, she had become a symbol of strength. Meanwhile, Derrick had disappeared from the public eye. Last she heard, he had left town, unable to bear the weight of his mistakes. Victoria no longer wasted energy thinking about him. He was nothing more than a chapter in her past, one that had long been closed. As for Tasha, Victoria never bothered to find out what had happened to her. She had wasted enough time caring about people who didn't deserve it. Her focus was now on the future, on herself, on her dreams, and on the people who truly mattered. One evening, Victoria hosted a gala to celebrate her latest business expansion. It was a breathtaking event, filled with influential people, all eager to congratulate her. As she moved through the room, accepting handshakes and compliments, she caught sight of Donald standing by the bar, watching her with quiet admiration. She walked over, and without hesitation, she took his hand. "Dance with me?" she asked. He smiled, pulling her onto the dance floor. As they swayed to the soft music, Victoria felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. As the night went on, Donald leaned in, whispering, "Victoria, I love you." She met his gaze, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with certainty. And in that moment, she knew. "I love you too, Donald." And as they kissed under the shimmering lights, Victoria finally embraced the happiness she had fought so hard to earn. This was her happily ever after, on her terms, in her own time, with a love that was real. And for the first time, Victoria knew she had truly won. The end.